So, the Noble Eightfold Path. That's we're working through that. We spent the last couple of weeks, 2 weeks, I think, looking at right view. And I'm mostly working from this book, which is On the Path by Tanisara Biko. It's a wonderful book. I think I love the way he approaches the Pali Canon. So I'm mostly working through that book. And I'm following him in placing an awful lot of emphasis on right view. I'm expecting to get through quite a lot today. So certainly through right thought, intention, whatever, and probably through speech, action, and livelihood. But we'll get a long way through that. And we'll spend, I think, right concentration will be a full week, and effort and mindfulness, they may be 1 week, they may be separate weeks. But today, these aren't so dense. So, right resolve. So the word is translated, I first came across it as right thought. It is often translated as right intention. Tanisara translates it as right resolve. And the flavor he's trying to get at with resolve is this isn't, I'd kind of like to. This is something pretty strong. I really resolve to do this. Nothing wishy-washy about it. A sutra that I've used to kind of frame this discussion, if you wanted to look it up, is Majjhima Nikaya 117. And in that, the Buddha says, right view comes before everything else. Right view is the forerunner, which is why we spend so long on it. And then right effort, right mindfulness, and right view run around the three. And then when he looks at each of the 8 elements of the path, he looks at a mundane level, a transcendent level, and then a final level. These are all embedded in there. So there's a transition from and actually first off he talks about wrong. So there's wrong resolve, then there's mundane right resolve, then there's transcendent right resolve, and then there's final right resolve, whatever that would be. So there's this idea of a progression, if you like, a progression along a path, or alternatively from the Atthakavagga, the eightfold branching tree. There's something more organic about that than a stepwise path. So there's growth in this. So wrong resolve is very clearly defined as sensuality, ill will, and harmfulness. Those are the 3 attributes of wrong resolve. Sensuality is a word that I'm going to analogize sensuality with the aggregates, because we think of the 5 aggregates as being what caused the trouble. But actually, that's not technically correct. What caused the trouble are the 5 aggregates of clinging. The 5 aggregates is just a way of breaking stuff down, of seeing it's not what I think it is. It's when we regard them as the 5 aggregates of clinging, we start to hold on, we start to pull them together, we start to tell stories about them, that we get into trouble. So if they're just the 5 aggregates, and if we just see the 5 aggregates, everything's cool. And it's the same with sensuality. If we just see sensuality, that's fine. It's when there's a string of sensuality that starts pulling us in and we start getting stuck on it that it starts being a problem. So, wrong resolve, sensuality, ill will, and harmfulness. Right resolve, if we go to mundane right resolve, then the mundane right resolve would be to oppose or work against or work with sensuality, the strings of sensuality, with renunciation. Work with ill will, goodwill, metta, loving kindness. But goodwill it's easy to remember, it's opposite to ill will, right? And then harmfulness becomes compassion. So a question that comes out of this, actually, so I rather like thinking of compassion. I've come across this before, but it's a nice way of looking at it, I think. Compassion is what loving kindness looks like when it encounters suffering. I think that's kind of lovely.
Say that again.
Compassion is what loving kindness looks like when it encounters suffering. Mm-hmm. So loving kindness is to wish well for all beings. Compassion is to encounter suffering and to wish for suffering to be transcended, to subside, or whatever. So I think that's just a lovely way of seeing how they relate. But that plays into an important question here, which is, why spend so much time and create such an important distinction between two things that kind of feel very similar? Goodwill and compassion, ill will and harmfulness. And Tanisaro makes a distinction in them, which I think is actually a very useful distinction. He takes it back to what is often shows up in the Pali Canon as the three cravings, which are sensuality, becoming, and non-becoming, the two extremes of becoming and non-becoming, existence and non-existence, falling off into one of the two extremes. And harmfulness is wanting something really bad to happen. Harmfulness is wanting suffering to arise. That is a form of becoming. It is a dark form of becoming, but it is a form of becoming. Ill will is wishing things to go away. It's a form of non-becoming. So ill will and harmfulness, although they sound similar, they actually point in different directions. Ill will and harmfulness respectively to non-becoming and becoming. Non-becoming of something you don't like and becoming of something unpleasant to cause suffering. So I think it's kind of important, and it really points out that this whole right resolve works at the level of craving, if you want to look at the 12-fold chain of causation: feeling, contact, craving, clinging, and so on. So at the mundane level, we're encountering this practice and we're engaging in right resolve. We're working with this at the level of karma. We're looking at how this impacts our future lives, however you want to look at it, our next future life maybe being the next second, but it impacts the future for us and for other beings. And the idea of goodwill and compassion, which are external resolve, if you will, being important for our karma, is interesting. But it does make sense, because if you are in a place where you are generating ill will, or you're generating harmfulness, how can you possibly be acting skillfully? And I do think that the progression along this path, moving from the mundane through to the transcendent and so forth, this is a process of becoming increasingly skillful in every element of the path. So it's becoming increasingly skillful in our resolve, increasingly skillful in our speech, our action, our livelihood, and so forth. So how can we be becoming more skillful if we're generating ill will and we're generating harmfulness? We can't. So we have to be working on generating goodwill and on compassion for our own progression along the path. There's actually something in here, if I can find it, page 232. It's a short, yeah, here we go. So this is, I've not read that, well, I'll read it. It is always auspicious for one who is mindful. So this is said by a yucca spirit to the Buddha. So this isn't the Buddha speaking, it's a short verse to the Buddha. It's always auspicious for one who is mindful. The mindful one prospers happily, always. The mindful one grows better each day and is totally free from animosity. So the Buddha replies, it is always auspicious for one who is mindful. The mindful one prospers happily always. The mindful one grows better every day, but isn't totally freed from animosity. Whoever's heart all day, all night delights in harmlessness with goodwill for all beings has no animosity with anyone at all. And if you give the Metta Sutta a close reading, the Metta Sutta, it begins with, this should be done by one who is skillful in aim. Skillful in aim, it's kind of code for wanting to wake up, right? This should be done by one who is skillful in aim, who wishes to break through to a state of peace. And then he goes on and talks about engage in metta. And then the coda at the end it recaps this whole idea of the metta practice is really foundational as part of the waking up practice. So the metta suit is actually quite dense, and there's quite a lot of kind of code words in there that point in that direction. So the transcendent level of right resolve. Let's go to, I'll read the actual words if I can find it. I scribbled all over it, so it should show up as I flip through the pages here. There we go. So here's, and what is right resolve that is noble without effluence? And this is the transcendent one. Transcendent, a factor of the path. The thinking, directed thinking, resolve, mentality, fixity, transfixion, focused awareness, and verbal fabrications of one developing the noble path, whose mind is noble, whose mind is without effluence, who is fully possessed of the noble path. Kind of sounds like intense concentration practices to me. And there's elsewhere, it does read to me as if there's right resolve really gets tied up in right concentration as one evolves, as the practice evolves. So as a technical matter, unskillful resolves, if you play the language game, disappear in the first jhana, which is a state of concentration. Skillful resolves, because if you're thinking about the final, there's no resolves at all. There's no skillful, there's no unskillful. It's just nothing lands. Those expire, if you will, at the level of the second jhana, where the voices stop. There's no discriminating thought, no investigation in the second jhana. So right thought, I think, does link in with right concentration and right resolve, right thought, right resolve, links in with concentration. So as right resolve is cultivated, as it becomes more subtle, more refined, and it feels really natural that this would be the case, the concentration states associated with one's practice are just naturally becoming more set, more stable, more calm, more right brain rather than left brain oriented. The voices are going away. So as our resolve becomes more refined and dissipates, we will naturally be landing in concentration states or absorption states, which in the sutras are going to be defined as jhanas, because that's all the jhanas are. They're just these fairly refined, settled states of concentration. So that is right thought and right resolve. Right speech. Elizabeth will be leading a study session in a week and a couple of days, I guess, on right speech. And I think Katie will be playing a leading support role with Elizabeth on that. No? Well, you're helping in some way, Katie, I'm told. So thank you for that. But Elizabeth will be leading a session. And there's and it's a whole half day, because there's a ton of stuff in here. The Buddha spends a lot of time talking about right speech. But at a pretty high level, which is what we're going to do here, right speech is simply described as do not lie, do not engage in divisive speech, do not engage in harsh speech, and do not engage in idle chatter. And that's it. And it goes through the same kind of levels of refinement as the practice becomes more subtle and skillful. As best I can tell, within right speech, the only thing that is an absolute is thou shalt not lie. And it doesn't mean thou shalt not behave in a way that people can misinterpret truth. You can not tell somebody and they can go off down the garden path and do something else if you think it's unskillful to be telling them something. So you can not tell somebody. A good example would be, there's a story of a monk who showed up. He was a wealthy householder, and he showed up hanging around the Buddha, and somebody said, "Where are you from?" And he said where he was from, and the guy said, "Oh, there's an old family member of mine from there who I think became a home leaver a while ago. It was Fred. You're not Fred, are you?" And the guy just didn't answer, because he didn't want to be put in a position of receiving extravagant support and being held out as being different. So it's okay to not tell the truth, not speak, but when speaking, it is really important not to lie. And I actually had a conversation, as many of you know, on Friday nights. It's been closed for a month while I've been observing Ramadan, but we will resume this Friday. I meet with, have a session with a Sufi group up in Alpharetta. And we had a long conversation 6 weeks ago where precisely this point came up. And in that tradition, there's this same absolute prohibition against lying. It is just, you can't do it. The others shouldn't be done, but they're less strictly mandated. And the divisive speech, harsh speech. The Buddha actually engaged in sarcastic and strong and dismissive speech at times when he thought it was skillful, either for the individual who'd been a particular dolt and been misrepresenting the Dharma, had been doing harm, or so it would be particularly useful to be strong on that individual, or for the other people he was teaching to just make it very clear. So harsh speech, there are flavors there that you've got to be careful. And idle chatter, we have many conversations about what really is idle chatter. It's a soft one, and there are times when just the fabric of conversation, as long as it's not sloppy or inappropriate, and what is that? But there are times when just loose conversation can be helpful. There is something in the Vinaya, which I think is instructive in this. In the Vinaya, which is the monastic code, it's behavior within the order. If somebody's misbehaving, then any monk can initiate a proceeding where there's an inquiry into that monk's behavior. And it's required that everybody comes together, you're all honest and so forth. And so the complaint is put forward, the person who's the recipient of the complaint defends themselves, and there's just a conversation. And the rules around that obviously include rules around speech. And so the Vinaya rules for leveling a charge are that it should be spoken at the right time, the speech should be factual, the speech should be gentle, it should be connected with the goal, and in this case the goal is bringing forward the complaint, analyzing and investigating the complaint, and it should be offered with goodwill. So it's behavior that's being criticized, not a person. So I just think that's an interesting way of framing it. At the right time, factual, gentle, connected with the goal, and said with goodwill. And the response is required to follow the same steps. So that's right speech. As I say, there is a lot more there. Speech is something we all do an awful lot, and speech comes with what we would classically call left brain activities. So it inherently comes with a lot of the judging and the linear thought that comes with the left brain. So it can be really difficult, and we can trip ourselves up. So there are an awful lot of very practical things that come along with the practice of right speech. Right action. The canon is very straightforward on right action. It just recurringly, do not kill, do not take what's not yours, and do not engage in inappropriate sex or inappropriate sexual behavior. I shorthand it to sex because for the most part it is talked about as sexual intercourse with an inappropriate person, and generally it's written from a male standpoint, so it's inappropriate sex with a female, but it's sexual behavior towards married people, people who are engaged, so forth. I always like to, I always feel that's narrower than I'd like it to be, and I want it to be pointed at sensuality. But sensuality, I think, is actually addressed in what we just talked about a minute ago in right resolve. So the behavior that is being specifically addressed isn't the behavior that is directed at by resolve of abstaining from sensual, renunciation of sensuality, goodwill, compassion. It's specific behaviors: killing, stealing, not borrowing, but stealing, and inappropriate sexual behavior. So that's pretty straightforward. Right livelihood. The Buddha actually doesn't say a lot prescriptively about livelihood. That's really interesting. But if you think about what livelihood is that in which we engage in order to provide ourselves sustenance, to provide ourselves food. So livelihood is as simple as that. It's how we build into our need to feed. And all five aggregates get fed, right? So we're feeding the body. There's like real physical food. Then we're feeding volition. We're feeding our sense impressions. We're feeding consciousness. So all of these are places we go to get food. So right livelihood is around how we approach that. There's only one place I could find where the Buddha actually is prescriptive, and you'll be familiar with it. Monks, a lay follower, should not engage in 5 types of trade. Which 5? Trade in weapons, trade in living beings, trade in meat, trade in intoxicants, and trade in poisons. He really is not prescriptive. That really stands out because there's almost nothing like that. The other thing he does a couple of times, there is
cities, magical powers. We
can talk about that. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, talk about that after, because that's a good point. There are a couple of cases where somebody approaches the Buddha and says, "Hey, can you tell me what's going to happen in my next life? I'm an actor. I'm doing great things. I'm making people happy." And Buddha says, "You don't want to ask that." He says, "Yeah, I do. Please tell me." "No, you really don't." "Yes, I do. Please tell me." "Oh, well, you've done it now. You've asked 3 times, so I've got to tell you. I'm sorry. You're fooling people. You're tricking them. You're creating emotions that they don't need to land there. For you and for them. It's not a good thing. It's not going to have a good outcome." And he does the same. A soldier shows up, same conversation. And what happens with the soldier is nothing to do with killing. What happens with the soldier, he says, you are living your life generating ill will and desire for harmfulness. That's not a good thing. It's not about the livelihood itself and the killing that he criticizes. It's about the generation of ill will, the generation of harmfulness, which I think is interesting. So, what I get out of right livelihood really is there are just a few snippets that are really fairly strong, but for the most part, it's about our attitude to consumption and our attitude towards consumption and our attitude when engaging in consumption. Whether that's consumption feeding the physical body, our volition, sense media, consciousness. That's what I get out of right livelihood. And there's an umbrella around all of these, around these 3, which are the 3, I guess, precept-related ones, the activity-related ones: speech, action, and livelihood, which is how do these come back to right view? And there's an overriding set of principles here which are about not misdirecting or encouraging others to behave badly. about our virtue being the most important thing. So more important than losing our family, more important than losing our house, more important than anything is how we behave, whether we behave with integrity, whether we behave with virtue. Because that's truly what we have. So that's the deep principle underlying all of these, I think. And that is a principle that creates a framework for protecting us. If we truly do that, then we never feel bad about what we've done. And if you follow the karmic story, there's never any bad karma coming out of that. But our heart always feels good if we stand by these principles. And we become a safe place for other people. So we become a place where other people can come to nourish themselves, a place where other people can come and cultivate those same virtues. So we breezed through 4 of them this evening. All right, let's turn all this off. Oh, the other thing I will say is 2 or 3 more weeks on this, and then I will post up the book that's going to be about the Pure Land. So I'll post that over the weekend on that page if you wanted to look at that. No need to, but if you wanted to. And then what I'm going to do after that, I have a bunch of sutras, Zen and Pali mostly, that I use for my own practice. So it's like my own little chant book. So I'm going to work through